The following marketing information and discussion is provided for informational purposes only. It is not intended to be used as professional guidance or consultancy. You should find an agency for that. Comexis is a digital marketing agency, so feel free to hire us. But otherwise, just enjoy the show.
Hello everyone, welcome to The Buyer's Journey by Comexis, a discussion-based podcast on the ever-changing marketing landscape. I'm Matthew McGordy, the social media content producer here at Comexis.
I am Len Ward, the managing partner at Comexis.
So today we're taking somewhat of a step back from the advocacy stage of The Buyer's Journey, though depending on what stage you consider influencer marketers and things like that in, it could technically fit in here, but we're talking about podcasts and podcast ad revenue. There's a great piece by George Nagayan on Marketing Land talking about U.S. podcast revenue has grown by 53% in 2018. So U.S. advertisers spent an all-time high of $479 million on podcast ads in 2018, which is up 53% from $314 million the year prior, according to research by AIB and PwC. And the report also predicts that domestic podcast marketplace revenues will double to over $1 billion in 2021. I am interested in, they don't mention this in the report, though. I might have to dive a little deeper and see if they do. They don't mention what specific kind of ads they're talking about, if they're talking about ads that are directly recorded into the middle of the show, or just advertisements put cut in like a traditional ad would be. I'm guessing it's all of them because no matter what's happening, you're paying for them. But I am interested to see if there's any different statistics there. So according to this report, 51% of Americans over the age of 12 have listened to a podcast, and 22% have listened in the past week. 78% of listeners say they don't mind branded sponsorships. And when you mention audio-first technologies baked into smart speakers in cars, and advertisers realizing that podcasting is becoming a pretty good place to market. Especially for people who, like me, when I worked in New York, I had a nice hour and a half long commute. I listen to podcasts there and back all the time. The report also indicates that tracked to direct response ads had declined from 73% of all podcast ads in 2016 to 51.6% last year. The decline coincides with the rise of branded content campaigns and brand awareness ads, suggesting that podcasts may be more efficient for campaigns that do not require tracking via unique code or URL, which I think makes a lot of sense personally. So what do you think about this, Len?
Yeah, I think that advertising in the podcast is definitely an awareness stage play. It could reach into the consideration, and it could reach into the purchase phase. It could be you could attribute some sales and attribute some leads in the funnel working all the way down, but I do agree it's a little difficult to track because some people are listening to the podcast and know they're not going to take action right away. A couple of the podcasts I listen to, marketing, they're actually really good at the very end of the podcast, right before they do their summary. They come in and say this podcast was sponsored by, and they do like it's a solid 90-second dissertation as to why you should look at that product. And I like how they put it at the very end of the podcast, right before you have to walk. You want to hear your final closing thoughts on it, because then it keeps it top of mind as you're walking away. We don't do a lot of marketing on podcasts. I know it's something that it's definitely a 2020 initiative. We do our own podcast. You're listening to it right now. Hey. I listen to a lot of podcasts. Matt said he listens to a lot of podcasts. It's definitely a growing form of entertainment. I think it's another great way to do the awareness stage. because right now, the awareness stage campaign, from a digital standpoint, you're kind of stuck at the social media, Facebook, Instagram, to a lower YouTube, Google Display, to a lower point, LinkedIn, Twitter, Snapchat. That's about as far as you should be going on the awareness stage campaign. Yes, you can look at Twitch and other stuff. We'll pause that for a minute. And then there's podcasts, which is kind of sitting down there. It's at what point, do you start advertising there? I know one of the things that we are doing now is digital radio ads, which are starting to work fairly well for us from an awareness stage. So I think podcast is the next lateral step up into doing that. I know you can do that already with Spotify, because I use Spotify for podcasts and so forth. So, but I think there's a lot of good podcasts out there where you could actually contact the people directly and advertise directly to them, opposed to going on a platform, which would be a very interesting play. So right now, if somebody said, well, what do you think about advertising in podcasts? I just don't think there's enough information or data for me to say put a lot of money into it. But I always say there's that 20% you have at the very end to play around with. 80% goes towards the big guys everybody's heard me talk about. I would absolutely maybe carve out 5% of my campaign and give it a shot and see what happens.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point. A lot of the times when I listen to a couple podcasts that are a little comedy-esque, a little informative, but in like sort of a funny way, right? And a lot of the times they'll have baked-in ads halfway through the show. But the benefit of doing that is you end up with people potentially making jokes about your product in a good way, not in a bad way, for anywhere from like 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So you paid. It's the classic radio thing of you've paid for 60 to 90 seconds, and you're probably going to get 3 times that, depending on what good joke spree you get through, right? Obviously, that's not going to happen with every podcast, but I know, when we have the statistics of 78% of listeners don't mind branded sponsorships, I think when we talked about baked-in ads and contacting either the podcasters themselves, or if they're a part of a podcast initiative or something like that, being able to contact those people to get your ads in is a really good way to try and test the waters and see if this really is for you. I mean, I've seen a lot of places like Blue Apron and things like that using that. More subscription services, maybe it's better for services like that. I'm not sure, but it definitely is an interesting and growing market that we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on.
It's funny you said Blue Apron. I'm wondering if they're advertising in there because they're going after the people who show a propensity to keep coming back over and over to a certain product, and Blue Apron is kind of a reoccurring type product. So it's funny how you said Blue Apron and how they're doing that, because there's a loyalty to podcasts. You come in and do it. It's not like a one-off thing. So I could just be completely making that up, but it's I can see the similarities as to why they would advertise that on podcast.
I think it makes sense because when we talk about, I mean, I think podcasters, at the end of the day, they're personalities, and that's, unless you're listening to like a fiction podcast, that's why you're listening to them. You want to hear what these people are saying, either their opinions on things or their jokes or something like that, right?
Right.
And when you have certain brands like Blue Apron, like MeUndies, like things like that, you're talking about lifestyle brands, basically, in different aspects of lifestyle, right?
No, yeah, you're right.
And it makes sense to have these personalities sort of explaining why this product is so good. So, I mean, I think the retention of, these people keep coming, listen to the same podcast makes sense, but I think it's just like any influencer marketing thing of these people like these people, and then they want to know what their products are and stuff like that. And I think when we talk about things like Blue Apron, like how many people actually know how to cook and cook well, it makes sense that you would go to these people and go, oh yeah, I don't know how to cook for shit. Oh, I need to censor that. Anyway, I don't know how to cook for shit, and then now I know how to cook reasonably well.
Because I got Blue Apron.
Yeah, so I agree with you though. I definitely think it's probably in part they keep coming back so loyally, right? But I also think it makes sense from a lifestyle personality kind of angle. So it all comes together in one.
I agree.
One great marketing pie cake. I don't know.
Whatever Blue Apron makes.
Yeah, whatever. I lost this metaphor somewhere. Anyway, that's all for today's episode of The Buyer's Journey. Check us out on Comexis.com, YouTube, and anywhere you get your podcast. And follow us on Twitter at @buyers_journey. Thanks for tuning in.